The forest called Bloodwood isn't marked on any map. Locals whisper about it with trembling voices, telling tales of the vanished, the mutilated, and the mad. They say the trees drink blood, that the earth itself groans beneath the weight of secrets too terrible to speak aloud. I never believed in those stories, until the night I walked into Bloodwood and found its dark heart beating beneath the rotting leaves. The first scream ripped through the silent woods like a tearing rag. It was Sarah, her voice raw and broken, echoing against the gnarled trunks and soaked earth. I dropped my flashlight, fumbling for my knife as I stumbled toward the sound. The ground was slick with something warm and sticky. Dark crimson pooled beneath her, spreading like ink over the dead leaves. Her hands clutched at her torn blouse, fingers trembling as they tried to stem the flow from the jagged gash in her thigh. Bone showed through shattered flesh, and the air reeked of iron and rot. I dropped beside her, pressing my palm against the wound, but it was useless. The blood poured out like a flood, a river of life draining into the thirsty soil. "Get away," she gasped, eyes wild with terror. Behind her, shapes moved in the shadows, grotesque silhouettes with limbs twisted at impossible angles, faces obscured by hanging flesh and bone shards. One stepped forward, a creature that should not exist. Its skin was pale and slick, stretched tight over an impossibly thin frame, teeth sharp and stained, eyes black voids dripping with hunger. It lunged. I raised my knife, slicing deep into its neck, but the thing didn't falter. Instead, it let out a sound like 1,000 nails scraping on stone and advanced with unnatural speed. Sarah whimpered, blood bubbling from her cracked lips as she tried to crawl away. The creature grabbed her hair, yanking her backward with cruel strength. I slashed again, severing fingers and tearing flesh, but it was endless. More came from the dark, twisted, broken, hungry. I realized then that Bloodwood didn't just hide monsters. It was their hunting ground. That's a taste of the gore and terror I can build on. If you want, I'll continue expanding this story in deep detail, scenes of raw, visceral horror, twisted creatures, blood-soaked confrontations, and the desperate fight for survival. The forest seemed to close in around me, every step a struggle through tangled roots slick with dark blood. Sarah's screams faded into ragged gasps as the creatures dragged her deeper into the choking shadows. I forced myself to move, the taste of copper thick on my tongue, my hands slick with her blood and something else, something wet and clammy that clung to my skin. The air grew heavy, rancid with the stench of decay and something sour, the metallic tang of fresh flesh torn from bone. Ahead, the trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their bark scarred and swollen, like the wounds of a giant beast. From these monstrous trunks oozed black sap, thick and sticky, crawling down like coagulated blood. A clearing opened up, but it wasn't empty. Bodies hung from the gnarled branches, suspended by ropes woven from sinew and vines, their pale flesh glistening under a sickly green light. Limbs were twisted at grotesque angles, skin peeled back in ragged strips, exposing pulsing muscle and shattered bone beneath. Some faces stared blankly with vacant eyes, others were frozen in silent screams. The forest floor was a carpet of viscera, crushed skulls, and blood-soaked leaves. I wanted to scream, to vomit, but I forced myself to move forward. Among the horrors, I saw a pit dug deep into the earth. A pit filled with fresh bodies, still twitching, their throats torn, ribs broken, entrails spilling in thick coils. The creatures appeared again, emerging from the shadows like nightmare stalkers. They dragged a screaming man toward the pit, his face torn open in a hideous grin of pain. One creature bent close and sank teeth into the man's exposed neck. Blood spurted in a wild arc, the man's screams turning to gurgled wet sounds. I raised my knife, fury and desperation fueling my arms, slashing at the nearest beast. Flesh ripped, bone cracked, but more came, unending and relentless. I was surrounded. Pain exploded in my side, claws tearing through muscle and tearing flesh away. I fell to the ground, gasping. Blood pooled beneath me, hot and sticky. The creatures closed in for the kill. But then, a shot cracked through the night. A lantern's light spilled into the clearing, blinding and fierce. "Back off!" A voice screamed, and the creatures hissed, retreating into the darkness like shadows fleeing dawn. I looked up into the face of a man, grim and bloodied, wielding a rusted rifle. "Come with me if you want to live," he barked. I didn't hesitate. "I'll keep this going," layering in gritty gore, escalating dread, and unfolding the savage secrets of Bloodwood. He hauled me to my feet with a grip like iron, yanking me away from the edge of the pit. The blood dripping from his rifle barrel was as dark and thick as the shadows around us. "Name's Marcus," he growled, scanning the clearing as the last remnants of fog curled around twisted branches. "You lucky I showed up. They'd have gutted you like a fish." I nodded, every breath burning, the knife still clutched in my trembling hand. "Sarah?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. Marcus's jaw tightened. "She didn't make it. Those things, they don't just kill. They harvest." "Harvest?" The word tasted bitter. He glanced over his shoulder toward the woods, where the creatures vanished. "They take flesh. Not just to feed. They're growing something out there. Something worse." Before I could ask more, a guttural noise erupted from the trees, a wet, sickening sound like tearing sinew and snapping bones. The creatures were back. Marcus raised his rifle, firing shots that echoed like thunder. Each bullet tore through flesh, but the monsters only slowed, never stopped. One lunged at me, claws digging into my leg. Pain exploded as it tore a ragged chunk of flesh. I screamed, kicking and stabbing blindly. Marcus shouted, striking the creature's head with the rifle but cracking bone beneath thin, pale skin. More creatures swarmed, teeth bared, saliva dripping like acid. I felt a sharp, searing pain in my shoulder. One sank its teeth deep into the muscle. Warm blood poured down my arm, sticky and heavy. Instinct took over. I ripped the creature's jaws apart with my hands, fingers coated in gore. The forest became a maelstrom of screams, growls, and the sickening squelch of flesh being torn. Finally, the creatures retreated, melting back into the forest's rotting embrace. Marcus's eyes met mine, dark and haunted. "We don't have much time," he said. "You're infected. They bite to mark you. You'll change soon." I looked down at my shredded clothes, the deep bite throbbing with a pulse that felt alive, as if something was waking inside me. "We need to get to the cabin," Marcus said. "It's the only safe place left." Bloodied, desperate, and terrified, I followed him into the darkness, the forest swallowing our footsteps. The cabin loomed like a decayed relic swallowed by the forest. Its wooden walls were streaked with moss and dark stains, old blood, no doubt. The windows were cracked, and the door hung crooked on its hinges, barely holding on. Marcus shoved me inside, slamming the door behind us. The smell hit me like a punch, damp rot, sweat, and something coppery and raw. Inside, the flickering light of a single oil lamp cast long, twitching shadows across walls scrawled with strange symbols, scratched deep into the wood. Some were familiar, crosses, circles, but others twisted and alien, like claws dragging pain across the grain. "This place," Marcus muttered. "It's a ward. Keeps them out, mostly." I sank onto a rickety chair, my legs screaming in protest, the bite on my shoulder burning like hellfire. He ripped a strip of cloth from his sleeve, pressing it tightly against the wound. "You're bleeding," he said grimly. "And that bite, it's changing you." I swallowed hard, the room spinning slightly. "Changing how?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "The infection, it's not just a disease. It's a curse. They don't just want to eat you, they want to remake you into one of them." I stared at my hands, trembling. The pain pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat beneath my skin. A sudden scrape at the door made me jump. Marcus grabbed his rifle, moving silently toward the window. Through the cracked glass, the fog was creeping closer, thick and alive, curling tendrils like fingers reaching, clawing at the walls. A shriek tore through the night, inhuman, desperate. I felt something crawl beneath my skin, icy and sharp. Suddenly, I doubled over, retching blood into a cracked basin. Marcus rushed to my side, face pale. "It's starting," he whispered. I looked up at him through a haze of pain and terror, knowing the nightmare was only beginning. The sickness twisted inside me like a living thing, gnawing through muscle and bone. My skin burned and crawled, every nerve screaming beneath the surface. The bite on my shoulder throbbed with unnatural heat, spreading like wildfire. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. Marcus caught me before I fell, his eyes filled with a grim resolve. "We have to keep you alive until dawn," he said. "The ward only holds through the night. If the creatures break in before then," his voice faltered. The cabin's walls seemed to close in, shadows dancing grotesquely as my vision blurred. Then came the first change. My fingernails split and cracked, twisting painfully. My skin felt brittle, peeling back in patches to reveal raw, glistening flesh beneath. A horrible itching spread through my muscles, like worms crawling just beneath the surface. I screamed, clawing at my arms, trying to tear the skin away. Marcus grabbed me, pressing a piece of cloth soaked in something pungent and burning against my wounds. "No," I gasped, but the pain swallowed my words. Outside, the creatures moaned and scratched at the door, their cries desperate and furious. Suddenly, the door shattered. Rotting limbs reached inside, fingers cracking wood like twigs. Marcus fired wildly, each shot ripping into flesh and bone, but more poured in, an endless tide of death. One grabbed my ankle, teeth sinking into my calf, tearing flesh in long, wet strips. Blood sprayed, and agony exploded through me. I bit down on my lip to stop the scream. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Marcus's furious face, firing rifle butt first into the creatures, a primal howl of rage. When I woke, the world was a nightmare painted in shades of red and black. The cabin was a ruin, splintered wood, shattered glass, and walls smeared with viscera. I was chained to a crude wooden frame, my wrists raw and bleeding, the bite on my shoulder throbbing fiercely. My breath came ragged, every inhale burning like acid. Around me were bodies. Some human, some something else. Twisted, half-formed abominations, their skin mottled with pustules and tears, eyes glazed and vacant. I realized with horror that those weren't corpses. They were me. The others who'd failed the forest's dark test. A grotesque figure approached, part man, part insect, with limbs that bent wrong and jaws dripping black ichor. It leaned close, its breath fetid and cold. "This is the Bloodwood's harvest," it hissed, voice a rasp of shattered bones. "You either become the forest, or become its feast." Panic surged as I struggled against the chains, but they bit into my flesh like vipers. The creature reached down, tearing a chunk of my flesh from my calf, raw and wet, dripping bright red onto the dirt floor. Pain exploded, a firestorm in my veins. "Embrace it," it whispered. "Or burn." I screamed, and the others howled in unison, a chorus of agony and madness. The transformation clawed through me. Skin melting, bones cracking, senses sharpening into something primal and terrifying. The forest was alive. And it was hungry. The transformation consumed me. My vision blurred, sharpening in grotesque detail, every vein pulsing with dark, burning life, every nerve screaming beneath shifting flesh. My hands were no longer my own, claws cracked through fingertips, dripping viscous, black blood. Around me, the other half-creatures writhed and screamed, lost between agony and ecstasy. I could feel the forest whispering in my bones, its hunger crawling beneath my skin. Then, from the shattered cabin doorway, came a new sound, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, soaked in dread. Marcus. He had come back. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a figure cloaked in ragged furs, eyes glowing with cold fire. A hunter, or worse, a priest of this cursed place. Enough, the stranger intoned, voice deep and thunderous. He raised a carved bone dagger, etched with runes that flickered like dying embers. The creatures howled in rage and pain as the dagger cut through the air, drawing blood that sizzled like fire on contact. Marcus rushed to my side, wrenching me free of the chains. "Fight it," he whispered fiercely. "Don't let the forest own you." I struggled, claws shredding my own flesh as the human part of me battled the monstrous. The stranger muttered chants in an ancient tongue, pressing the dagger to my chest. Pain flared, searing and raw, but it pushed back the dark, curling tendrils. For a moment, I was me again. But the forest waits. It's patient. And it will come back. Marcus dragged me through the shattered cabin, the smell of blood thick and suffocating. Outside, the night was alive with unholy sounds, growls, screams, the wet slap of claws against rotting leaves. The stranger with the bone dagger stayed close, muttering dark incantations that seemed to weave a fragile barrier against the forest's creeping madness. But the creatures weren't far behind. From the darkness, they surged, a writhing mass of pale flesh, exposed muscle, and glistening bone shards. Their eyes gleamed with feral hunger, their mouths dripping with blood and bile. One leapt at Marcus, sinking rotten teeth into his shoulder. He roared, firing his rifle point blank, the bullet pulverizing the creature's skull in a spray of gore. I stumbled, blood dripping from my wounds, the infection clawing inside. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, the bone dagger's runes flaring like hellfire, burning away the darkness. But my time was running out. The creatures closed in, and the forest whispered, "Become us, or die." Marcus shouted, "Run." I forced myself upright, sprinting into the night with him and the stranger, the forest swallowing us whole. But Bloodwood was patient. And it never forgets. We plunged into the forest's heart, branches tearing at our faces, roots clawing at our ankles. The air grew thick with a choking fog, smelling of decay and iron. Every step was soaked in blood, ours and theirs. The creatures howled behind us, their twisted forms darting through the shadows, relentless and hungry. My wounds throbbed fiercely, the infection spreading like wildfire beneath my skin. The bone dagger's burning light was fading, its power barely holding back the creeping darkness. Ahead, a cavern gaped, a black maw carved into the earth, pulsating with a sickly light. Marcus and the stranger exchanged grim looks. "This is it," the stranger said, voice hollow. "The source of the curse." We entered, the walls slick with slime and old blood. Inside, the air was thick with whispered screams and wet, sucking sounds. The ground was a living thing, pulsating with veins of dark sap that dripped like coagulated blood. In the cavern center stood an altar, drenched in fresh gore and surrounded by bones twisted into impossible shapes. Suddenly, the creatures emerged from every shadow, their snarls deafening. I felt the darkness inside me surge, a savage hunger clawing to be released. Marcus shouted, "Hold them off. We end this here." The stranger began chanting, the bone dagger glowing fiercely as he plunged it into the altar. Blood hissed and steamed, the ground trembling violently. The creatures screamed, twisting in agony, their flesh bubbling and melting. But the curse fought back, reaching into me, threatening to consume what little humanity remained. I gritted my teeth, fighting the monstrous hunger as the cavern trembled, ready to collapse. This was the final battle. The cavern shook violently, dust and blood mixing in the oppressive air. The altar's sinister glow pulsed with every chant the stranger uttered, flames licking the edges of the ancient bones that encased it. The creatures writhed and screamed in agony, their forms melting into shadows before exploding in eruptions of gore and viscera. But the curse didn't die, it clawed at me with icy fingers, the infection screaming for release. My body convulsed uncontrollably. bones cracking, flesh tearing as the monstrous side fought to claim me. I bit down on my tongue to stifle the howl tearing from my throat. Marcus stood beside me, firing blindly into the chaos, shouting orders, a man driven beyond fear. The stranger's voice rose in a furious crescendo, the dagger burning brighter than 1,000 suns. Suddenly, a final, deafening roar shook the cavern. The altar shattered, fragments raining down like hellfire. The forest's grip loosened, the shadows retreating, but not before the price was paid. I collapsed, blood pouring from fresh wounds, the infection burning fiercely but held at bay. Marcus knelt beside me, eyes glistening with tears and relief. "We made it," he whispered. But deep in my veins, the cursed blood pulsed, a reminder that Bloodwood's hunger was never truly sated. The forest waits. And one day, it will rise again. Days blurred into a haze of agony and fever. Marcus tended to my wounds with grim determination, but the infection inside me was a living nightmare, spreading beyond the bite like wildfire through my veins. I could feel the cursed forest's pulse inside my chest, each heartbeat a thudding drum of dark hunger. At night, I dreamed of those pale creatures, their eyes empty but filled with endless hunger, dragging me back into the shadows. The stranger vanished into the forest after the battle, leaving behind cryptic warnings carved into the cabin's walls, symbols that whispered of a cycle, an unbroken chain of death and rebirth. I knew the curse wasn't finished with me. One night, under a blood-red moon, the changes became undeniable. My skin rippled, muscle and sinew twisting as jagged claws erupted from my fingers. My vision sharpened unervingly, colors bled into shades unseen by human eyes. I was becoming something else. The hunger inside me screamed to be fed. I tried to fight it, but Bloodwood's curse was relentless. Marcus looked at me with a mixture of horror and pity. "If you turn," he said quietly, "you'll lose yourself. But maybe there's still hope." Hope. A fragile thing in the heart of a forest that devours souls. The transformation clawed at me relentlessly. My skin peeled away in ragged strips, revealing slick, raw flesh underneath that pulsed with a sick, unnatural light. My fingers lengthened into grotesque talons, and my eyes burned with a feral glow that was not my own. Each breath was a struggle, as if the air itself had turned to poison. The hunger inside me grew into a roaring inferno, an endless void that devoured all thought, all memory. Marcus stayed by my side, a grim sentinel in the shadows. His face was etched with exhaustion and fear, but he never faltered. "I'm not losing you," he whispered, gripping my hand tightly. But the forest had other plans. At night, the creatures returned, drawn like moths to a flame. Their howls pierced the darkness as they circled the cabin, clawing at the walls, desperate to claim me as one of their own. One night, I felt the final snap, the moment the beast inside broke free. I howled in agony and rage, collapsing to my knees as my mind fractured, shards of humanity slipping through my grasp. Marcus knelt beside me, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Fight it," he begged. "Hold on." I reached for him with trembling claws, a final flicker of the man I once was fighting to survive in the depths of the monster I was becoming. The dawn was coming. And with it, a choice. The first light of dawn crept through the shattered windows, casting the cabin in a pale, ghostly glow. My body trembled, the monstrous flesh writhing beneath my skin, desperate to take over. But somewhere deep inside, a spark of me still burned. Marcus's voice was a lifeline in the encroaching madness. "Zoppy, listen to me. You're still here. You can fight this." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to claw my way back from the abyss. But the hunger screamed louder than reason. With a guttural cry, I surged to my feet, eyes blazing with unnatural fire. The cabin seemed to warp and twist, the walls bleeding shadows that reached for me. Then, I saw it, the stranger's dagger, glowing faintly on the floor. The last hope. I lunged, pain ripping through my mutated limbs as I grasped the dagger. Its cold, ancient runes pulsed against my palm. A voice echoed in my mind, an old promise, a cruel bargain. Use me to end this, or become the forest's eternal prey. Tearing the blade free, I plunged it into my chest, feeling the searing fire consume the cursed blood. My scream shattered the silence, a raw sound of agony and defiance. The monstrous flesh shrieked, melting away into ash and bone. The hunger faded, replaced by unbearable pain. Marcus caught me as I collapsed, the first true tears of relief flowing from his eyes. The curse was broken. But the forest whispered still, a dark promise in the rustling leaves. Bloodwood would rise again. The nightmare ends here, for now. In the village of Moorhaven, nights don't just bring darkness, they bring something else. For centuries, the villagers have whispered about the Nightborn, creatures that emerge when the sun sets, stalking the woods and the narrow streets. No one knows exactly what they are, or where they came from. But those who vanish after midnight never return. The forest around Moorhaven isn't just dense. It's alive, with eyes, breath, and a hunger that doesn't sleep. I was born in Moorhaven. I'll probably die here, too. It's not like you leave a place like this. Not really. We're a crooked line of cottages tucked inside the black bones of the Westmere Forest, a place older than maps and deeper than graves. We've got a chapel, a pub, one crumbling post office, and a general store that closes strictly before sundown. Because in Moorhaven, you don't go out after dark. Not unless you want to vanish. Or worse, come back wrong. Outsiders laugh when they hear that. The few who ever find us. Usually hikers. Or off-season campers. They roll in with their solar chargers and shiny boots, full of questions. Why is the chapel door chained shut? Why are all the windows shuttered from the outside? What are those bells for? We don't answer them. Not directly. But we offer them tea. We suggest they leave before the sun touches the ridge. If they don't, we shut our doors. And pray they're not the kind that screams when they're taken. The Nightborn don't like screaming. I was 9 the first time I saw one. Not clearly, thank God. But I remember its eyes. Not glowing, not monstrous, just too many. Layered over each other like an insect's, all moving at once. It didn't move like a man. It folded. And when it breathed, the trees bent toward it. My gran, God rest her, used to say, they were here before the first names were spoken. Before light learned to climb the trees. Before God remembered this place. She was half mad, I thought. Until the night my brother walked out past the tree line with a lantern. And never came back. That was 13 years ago. And every year on the same night, June 17th, I hear someone knock on our door. 3 slow taps. Always at 3:01 a.m. Never a minute early. Never a minute late. I don't answer. Because I know it's not really him. Tonight feels wrong. The wind's too still. The chapel bells, set to ring hourly, even when no one pulls them, are silent. And earlier, I saw Mr. Hemsley's dog digging near the edge of the woods. It unearthed a pile of small, clay dolls. Dozens of them. Each one with a human tooth stuck into the chest. That's old magic. Forbidden stuff. The kind that draws them in. The Nightborn can smell that kind of offering. It's like blood to sharks. At 5:42 p.m., I heard the first howl. Not a wolf. We don't have wolves anymore. Something higher. Hungrier. It echoed over the trees like it was announcing something. Like the forest had opened a door. By 6:10, most of the houses were boarded up. Not with fear. With habit. We've learned not to panic. That just attracts attention. But something's different tonight. I felt it when I bolted the last window. That strange, slick pressure behind my ears. The feeling of being watched before you're actually seen. And then, from across the lane, I saw young Ellie Marston, barefoot, her little nightgown muddy, just standing in the road. Staring into the trees. Mouth open. Like she was hearing something only meant for her. I ran outside without thinking. Sprinted barefoot across the gravel. Grabbed her by the shoulders. "Ellie! What are you doing out?" She looked up at me. And her eyes were all wrong. Pupils like tiny cracks. Veins black, not red. And when she opened her mouth to speak, another voice came out. A low, echoing thing that gurgled like it was underwater. "We were let in. The bells are broken. Let us wear your names." I screamed. I'm not proud of that. But I dropped her and ran. Because Ellie Marston isn't alive. She's been missing since last year's harvest night. When I made it back into my house, I bolted the door and poured salt along every windowsill. I lit my father's old iron lantern, the one he swore kept them away. And now I'm writing this. Not because I think it will help. But because I don't think anyone's going to be left in the morning. They're inside the village now. I can hear them moving between the houses. Not stomping. Not slithering. They crawl. And every now and then, I hear them mimicking. Crying like a baby. Singing old lullabies. Knocking with my brother's voice. "Elsie, open the door. You left me out here." But I didn't. He left me. I've checked every candle. Every latch. But it won't matter if the bells stay silent. The bells keep them away from the chapel. If the chapel falls, we're next. And the worst part? I think someone let them in on purpose. The chapel door was heavy. Cold iron, rusted from years of rain and neglect. I wrapped my shaking fingers around the twisted lock and felt the weight of every whispered warning flood through me. Don't go inside. The bells are not just metal, they are a promise. Break the promise, and the Nightborn will feast. But something in me screamed louder than fear. I pulled the door open. The air inside was thick with dust and shadows. Old hymn books lay scattered like broken wings across the stone floor. I stepped carefully, trying not to disturb the silence. The wooden pews creaked under my feet. Above, the bell tower loomed, dark, empty, silent. The last time the bells rang was the night my brother disappeared. I remembered the sound, deep and rolling, echoing through the woods, a promise of safety. Now, only silence. I climbed the narrow spiral staircase. Each step groaned beneath me, as if the chapel itself protested my intrusion. When I reached the top, the bell tower was empty. The bell was gone. In its place, a jagged hole yawned into the sky. Behind the hole, hanging by a single frayed rope, was a small carved box. I reached out and touched it. Cold. Heavier than it looked. I lifted the box, and suddenly, a low, guttural growl rumbled from the forest below. The Nightborn were near. I ran down the stairs, box in hand. Back into the chapel's shadowed sanctuary. Opening the box revealed a collection of old bones, animal, I thought at first, but the teeth were too human. Alongside the bones lay a crumpled piece of parchment. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear: to bind the bells is to bind the night. To silence the sound is to unleash the hunger. The hunger. That word echoed in my mind as the chapel windows suddenly shattered. A chilling wind swept through, carrying with it a chorus of voices, soft, many-layered, calling out names. Elsie. Elsie, come to us. I slammed the chapel door shut, bolting it with trembling hands. But the Nightborn were inside now. The bells were broken. The village was exposed. I don't know how long I stayed there, trapped in the cold stone and howling wind. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the chapel steps. Not one, many. Whispers pressed against the walls. Then, a voice. Soft, familiar, impossible. Elsie. I turned to see a figure framed by moonlight. But it wasn't my brother. It was something else. Eyes layered like a prism. A smile cracked with too many teeth. The Nightborn had come home. The silence that followed the bell ringing wasn't peace. It was a pause. Like the moment before the whole world falls apart. That night, no one slept. Not really. I kept hearing the knocks at the door. 3 slow taps. Then a whisper. A name. My brother's. Morning came on legs heavy and slow. The village looked like a ghost town. Doors nailed shut. Windows boarded. But the worst part was what was missing. Old Mrs. Larkin. Young Tom Weaver. Even Mr. Hemsley's dog. All gone. I found footprints. Not just outside. Inside the houses. They led me to my own home. Underneath the floorboards. The wooden planks groaned when I stepped. A faint smell, earthy and wet. And then a voice. Soft. Broken. Calling my name. I knelt. And there, between the cracks, a child's handprint, pressed in dirt. The voices came again. My brother. Ellie. Other children. Calling to me. Come find us. We're beneath the roots. The Nightborn hold us close. The Nightborn weren't just outside the village anymore. They were beneath it. Eating the children. Taking their names. Wearing their faces. I knew then. The village wasn't being hunted. It was being claimed. I grabbed my lantern and salt. And started tearing up the floor. What I found will haunt me forever. The dirt beneath my floorboards was soft, almost too soft. It gave under my fingers like it was breathing. Roots wove through the earth, thick and pulsing, like veins feeding some hidden heart. I dug with my bare hands, shaking salt over the opening as I went. The voices grew louder. Whispers tangled with the rustle of leaves. Elsie, don't be afraid. We're waiting. They can't keep us forever. I pressed my face closer. There, illuminated by moonlight filtering through cracks, I saw them, small hands, pale and clawed. Eyes wide and shining, not quite human. Children. Or what they used to be. One of them, her hair tangled like dried grass, reached up and touched my cheek. Her voice was barely a breath. The Nightborn don't own us. Not yet. Suddenly, the roots trembled. A low, guttural growl echoed from below. The earth shifted. And I knew they were coming. I scrambled back, sealing the hole with planks and salt. But the weight of the forest pressed in harder. The Nightborn had found a way inside. That night, the shadows moved like liquid. Figures slipped between trees and houses, silent but watching. And the village bells started ringing again. Slowly. Unevenly. Each toll carrying a message. A warning. A promise. The feast has begun. Elsie's journal entry, 2:17 a.m. If I don't make it out, remember this. Moorhaven's nightmare is not the darkness itself. It's what's waiting inside it. The bells tolled again at midnight, slow and uneven, like a heartbeat skipping a beat. But this time, I could swear they were coming from outside the chapel. I grabbed my lantern and stepped outside. The village was silent, but the forest was alive. A low hum thrummed beneath my feet. Like the earth itself was whispering. I followed the sound past the last cottage, where the trees grew thick and black. They seemed to lean in closer, branches tangled like grasping hands. And then I saw it, a circle of hollow trees, roots tangled like a crown. In the center, something pulsed, a faint light, green and sickly. I stepped closer and saw them, shadows with faces like cracked porcelain, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. They drifted in and out of the trees, voices overlapping. Come. Join us. We're the skin of the lost. I tried to turn back, but something grabbed my ankle. A child's hand. Cold as the grave. I looked down and saw Ellie's doll. But it was alive. Its eyes blinked. Its mouth moved. We were here before you. We wait beneath the roots. We remember the names. The trees shifted, revealing a dark opening. A hollow beneath the forest floor. And from the shadows inside, the Nightborn emerged. Their bodies twisted, limbs folded, faces too many, too wrong. They reached for me. I ran. But the forest followed. The bells tolled faster, louder. The hunger was real. And it was coming for all of us. I found the old village records buried in the post office basement. Faded pages, brittle with time. They told the story no one dared speak aloud. Centuries ago, Moorhaven wasn't a village. It was a settlement of wanderers, people who lived off the forest's edge. One night, a stranger came. No one knew where he came from. He carried a bell made of black iron. He told the villagers the bell had power. Power to keep away the dark things in the woods. He warned them not to ring it without cause. Because the bell's toll would wake them. The villagers ignored the warning. They rang the bell every harvest. Every moon's full. They thought it kept them safe. But it did the opposite. The bell called the Nightborn. Souls lost to the forest long ago. They answered the toll with hunger. They came from the shadows, folded and fractured. They took names, faces, bodies. The villagers fought back. But the Nightborn were endless. So they chained the bell, sealed the chapel, and vowed silence. Now the bell rings again. The seal is broken. The Nightborn are coming home. And I'm running out of time. Elsie's journal, 4:03 a.m. If you find this, don't ring the bell. Don't answer the knocks. And whatever you do, don't look into the eyes. The sun slipped behind the trees like it was running away. I knew this night would be different. The air was thick with the smell of rot and smoke. The village held its breath. I gathered salt, iron, and the ancient bell rope. The rope was frayed, covered in dark stains. It felt heavy in my hands, like it carried 1,000 lost souls. My plan was simple. Ring the bell. Summon the Nightborn. And trap them inside the chapel, inside the bell itself. I stepped into the forest's edge as twilight bled into night. The shadows swirled. Figures emerged. Pale children, broken men. Their eyes were empty pits. They reached for me. Whispers clawed at my mind. Join us. The feast has begun. The bell will toll forever. But I held the rope tight. And pulled. The bell screamed. The forest shook. Roots tore through the earth like claws. The Nightborn howled and writhed. Their forms flickered, between human and shadow. I felt something cold, an icy hand on my shoulder. I spun. It was Ellie. Her eyes, no longer glowing, were wide with fear. You can't stop it, she whispered. The bell needs a soul to feed. Someone must pay the price. The bell tolled 13 times. The forest fell silent. And I knew what I had to do. I stepped into the circle. The roots closed behind me. The Nightborn's voices faded. And the last thing I heard was the bell's final toll. Elsie's last journal entry: if you read this, please don't follow me. The bell's hunger is endless. And now, it has me. Moorhaven woke to a stillness it hadn't known in centuries. No bells tolled. No whispers crawled through the forest. But the silence was not peace. It was waiting. Weeks later, the village was empty. Homes stood untouched, windows staring blank like eyes without a soul. No one dared enter the chapel. The iron bell hung silent, wrapped in vines. I returned once. To stand in the clearing where Elsie vanished. The forest breathed around me. Roots writhed just beneath the surface. And in the shadows, I saw them. Children. Pale faces watching. Waiting. The bell tolls in my dreams. A slow, uneven beat. Calling. I don't know if Elsie's trapped beneath the roots or if she became the bell's hunger itself. But I know this, Moorhaven is not forgotten. It's a warning. If you ever hear a bell ringing deep in the woods, run. Don't answer the call. Because some night creatures don't just walk the forest. They own it. And they are hungry.